Hello, and welcome to the Transatlantic Connection Show, bringing you artisan music and musicians, the vagabonds and adventurers, building with the raw ingredients of folk music from both sides of the Atlantic. I am Chris the Bish Leiden, and this week our vagabond is Mal MacWatt, a Scottish singer-songwriter who lives in London. He'll be sharing his new song, The Miller's Daughter, with us. On the scene this week, we're going to chat to Steele about the future of the live music industry. And join Kev from the house band talking about his journey through the southern states and all the musical influences he took from his travels. This is the Transatlantic Connection Show. Greetings, I am Chris the Bish Leiden. Thanks for joining us for episode 2 of the Transatlantic Connection Show. Thanks so much for the positive feedback from episode 1. Please do drop us a line on social media or comment on the videos on YouTube. It's great to get feedback. This week in our Vagabond and Scoundrels section, we are pleased to welcome our friend, singer-songwriter Mal MacWatt, a Scottish musician who lives in London now, who is in conversation with Steve Bonham this week. This is part 1 of the chat. There'll be a part 2 coming up in a future episode. Mal gives us a live rendition of his new song, The Miller's Daughter, so we hope you enjoy that. On the scene this week, we talked to music promoter, agent, publicist and music fan, Steele. Again, this is part 1 of a chat. There's more to come of that in the future. Graham is a huge supporter of live music, even all the way through lockdown. He's been putting on at least 1 live stream concert a day. Absolutely amazing. And from the house band, we join Kev Moore, multi-instrumentalist and vocalist with The Long Road, who tells us about his musical influences and in particular his time travelling the southern states of the USA and the musical melting pot that became his Blue Odyssey album. Remember, if you like what you see here and you'd like to support us so we can keep making more of it, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Patreon.com/thevagabondway. But first up, we have our Vagabond of the Week in conversation with Steve. Over to Steve.
You know, this transatlantic connection thing, it's one of those strange things which are kind of, you know what it is, but when someone says, what is it? It can be a little harder to pin down. It's something about taking the musical raw materials around you and from both America and from over here and creating something real and authentic and often very personal. And Mal MacWatt, who we're going to see the interview within a second now, he's almost that distilled. He lives down in London now. He's a Scot and writes across all genres. But you know it's him when he's singing and you know it's his songs when you hear them. If there was one rule for making this sort of music, you've got to have lived a life. And Mal certainly has. He started on the oil rigs. He's been a journalist. He's done various other jobs. He's down in London now, making a really interesting career on the London scene. So without more introduction, let's hand over and listen to what he's got to say. All recorded on an extremely hot day a few weeks ago. What have you been doing with yourself during this period, this lockdown and onwards period?
I have to say, lockdown for me has been put all the tragedy aside. But for me personally, it's been a game changer. Really, I have to say, because I normally play so many gigs, I'm playing all the time in London, and I always make sure that I'm good. So I spend a lot of time practicing and rehearsing. Yeah. Which does tend to make me not manage to have the time to, I suppose, to devote to writing new songs and new material. So having that pressure taken off me of not having to perform, it's just it's kind of filled that space with new songs. I put out a new EP called Scale, which were sort of 3 songs about kind of set around the Appalachians, but sort of set around Scottish emigration and American immigration. Those 3 songs would never have appeared had it not been for lockdown, you know, because the usual studio that I work with it's also in lockdown. I had to do every instrument on my own, you know, which I found so rewarding. And this particular EP for me, it's changed how I'm looking at music and how I'm looking at presenting myself, because it's had a really good reception, especially across the pond in the States. And I think as an Americana songwriter, to get a bit of recognition from the source, so to speak, is, you know, it feels amazing.
I think it's knockout. I think it's the closest, you know, for me, just meeting you over the internet over the last 3 months, finding somebody on a journey I recognise and have gone through has been total joy and kind of reassuring. At least there's two of us possibly insane rather than just one. What's the story of how you got to where you are now, though?
Well, definitely my mum, probably the biggest influence on me was my dad worked. He was a tree guy, a silviculturist. So he worked for Cadbury's out in West Africa, and he worked for the Ashanti goldfields in Ghana. I grew up with no television, no radio, just books and my mum's record collection, which was huge. She just loved everything from Motown to whatever was the latest pop. And she actually had this Transatlantic Records. It's an old British label that no longer.
Brilliant label, yeah.
They no longer run, and it was like a taster. So it had Pentangle, Bert Jansch, John Renburn, a rock band, a three-piece called Stray. I think being 10 years old and hearing that and wanting to play the guitar, because my mum played the guitar, and realising that the guitar could be jazz, rock, folk, country, and it could be all those things in one piece of music. Like Pentangle, probably not many 10-year-olds blown away by Pentangle, and so...
Light or something in 5/4, yeah.
We had another amazing one called Through a Five by a band called Medicine Head. Another British...
It's upstairs somewhere.
Songs like The Rising Sun and Indian Queen and Epitaph and all these great grooves, and bluesy, but not bluesy enough to be blues and not rocky enough to be rock. Just these guys just kind of run their own little path through music, and just being super influenced by all these great musicians and great guitar players as a really young age. So I think as a songwriter, I just wanted to find a space where I could incorporate that sort of love of all different types of roots music, but I could write new materials. I think in November 2018, I just did my own album, and I kind of haven't really looked back since.
Let's just pause for a second and hear one of them. So tell me the story behind Miller's Daughter. So
The Miller's Daughter is a brand new song. It's one of the few songs where the riff came first. I was messing around with a whole bunch of capos. I like to say thank you to G7th capos. They're very good to me. Just came across this riff, which sounded a little bit like Bobby Goldsborough's Summer the First Time, but it had this Celtic vibe to it. Wow. And it's not a riff I could ever have found, because the spacings were too, I think on standard tuning, I could never have played it. There's a kind of a boop, 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 boop sort of rhythm to it, which kind of reminded me of Windy Miller from the old TV, was it Trumpton or something?
Cumberland Green or one of the two, yeah.
It's got a windmilly kind of feel to it, So I ended up just writing the song about a couple, it's sort of love in a windmill, I suppose. So I've had quite a positive response to the song. So yeah, that's really.
Let's hear it then. Let's hear it.
Well, I have loved the miller's daughter, but the miller said I could not court her. We would climb where the gears could hide, words of love in her sweet sighs, my words of love in her sweet sighs. She was young but resolute, seed could spell but not bear fruit. For the miller had made his plans to wed his girl to a rich old man. That's just the way it was, and I could understand. But when the wind was up and the sails turned around, when the miller worked and the grist was ground, miller's daughter. We carried on for a year this way, till finally came her wedding day. So we kissed our last goodbyes. She became another's wife. He was rich, but he was not kind. So every time when the wind was high and the miller he had corn to grind, well, we'd be up where the gears would hide. Secret love and secret sighs. You see, our young love, it had never died. When the wind was up and the sails turned around, when the miller worked and the grist was ground, we'd be rolling round and around. Just me and the miller's daughter. One fateful day we were discovered, 'cause the wind had made us careless lovers. The miller had climbed into the gears. His rage and shame were crystal clear, and his shotgun warned me to get the hell out of here. So I hear news from time to time. She's got a son, I suspect he's mine. Her husband's rich, but he's getting old. So I'll just wait until his body's cold. One windy day, I'll be going home. When the wind is up and the sails spin around, when the miller works and the grist is ground, we'll be rolling around and around and around and around and around. Just me and the miller's daughter. Just me and the miller's daughter. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Mal MacWatt for joining Steve this episode and for that lovely performance of The Miller's Daughter. There's more to come from Steve and Mal in a future episode, so look out for that. I'm looking forward to hearing more from Mal and more music. This week on The Scene, Steve has a chat with Graham Steele, who is a music promoter and artist manager that connected up with us thanks to social media during lockdown. In the first part of Steve's chat with Graham talked about how he got started. Unfortunately, the sound recording on Zoom was garbled for this bit, so it wasn't up to scratch for broadcast. But to summarise, Graham started as an informal roadie for local music acts at a local venue of his, and then started volunteering for a local arts centre, eventually taking on the music programmer role there and discovering all sorts of different sorts of music, learning not just to book your pals. Ended up running all sorts of events, jazz festival, folk nights, Asian music events, guitar festivals, working with some great names in the sort of acoustic music world. He's worked at various art centres that unfortunately kept on suffering from local cuts and ended up shutting down, and so took matters into his own hands and decided about 5 years ago to set up his own company, the Graham Steele Music Company. And now he runs events, is agent for artists, does PR and promotion for artists, everything to do with live music and artists, basically. Over the course of lockdown here in the UK, so since about the 20th of March, Graham has organised and promoted 230 live streamed concerts, which is just an incredible achievement. Starting off with just a handful of live streams before lockdown proper, but seeing which way the wind was blowing and responding to audience feedback about how important it was to keep live music going somehow, it grew and grew. So some nights there was one performance, some nights it was 2 or 3. Now we're however many months on from the height of lockdown, we joined Steve and Graham when Steve is asking about what's next for the music industry.
Where do we go from here? What the hell do we do next?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is address the fact that, what was happening previously to lockdown wasn't really working, certainly on a grassroots level. I think, it wasn't sustainable. I know too many people were giving away time for free and doing gigs for free, and we've got to make a way of working. And I think in all sense and purposes, the music industry that doesn't really exist anymore, I think the days when you had you had different managers and you had different agents and you had different record companies and, very few record companies out there now, because a lot of people have learned how to do it themselves, really. In death, there's also rebirth, and I think there's, a great opportunity, to do something new and exciting. And I find it through the work that I do, where we're connecting with people like yourself, got radio shows, there's lots of really good independent radio shows out there, where people are playing and promoting good music. The BBC have just announced that they're getting rid of a lot of their specialist radio shows. So these guys that are working on independent shows are more vital than ever. There's a lot of promoters out there that are doing what I'm doing. There's people doing online magazines. And this is a fantastic opportunity, to connect those people and to get these people talking to each other. And I think if we can do that, that's a hell of a force that we will have. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of venues that are in a precarious situation, which might close. And I don't think, just because we're coming out of lockdown, that's a sign that everything's okay. The financial implications of these venues we will not see for another 5-6 months, and that's why we really need as many people to attend events, buy tickets, buy CDs of artists, buy the merchandise, do all of that stuff more than ever, because it's actually going to be the next few months that I think is going to be the trickiest. But if we can connect to each other, I think it could be an exciting time for grassroots music.
You come across as an amazingly enthusiastic and passionate guy, and if forgive me if I say, who's been through the mill on terms of music over 20 plus years. What keeps you going?
If you get an email every day from somebody saying this is important to me, you can't just ignore that. You've got to say, this is important to people. I think that's great. I think when you're working with musicians, over the last 2 weeks, I've listened to 2 albums and 4 singles which nobody's heard yet. That's the biggest honour and biggest privilege you could get, as a music fan. When you put on an event, and I don't think it's the number of people. The great thing about music is it isn't one of those things, especially live music, we haven't been able to replicate. If you put the same act on in the same venue in front of the same audience for 5 nights on the trot, you would have a different experience every single time.
If the government could do anything, given the fact we're always being told that how much the arts and music is not just a part of our national life, it's actually a part of our national balance sheet. What would you get the government to do? There
has been an announcement, about emergency funding for the arts. It's a tricky one, that, because I think the arts by its very nature works outside the box. So you have so many different organisations like mine, which fit between gaps and aren't able to apply for funding, aren't able to get money. There needs to be a restructure on how the arts are funded, really, because I think on a grassroots level, just talking to you, you're a musician, you perform music. You also write books. You also, are doing this, fabulous thing. You're not normally stuck in one category, And the way the funding works is that for you, for example, you would have to say, are you an author, a musician, a presenter, sort of like, which one are you? And
Buy the box and sit in it.
Yeah. It's the same with genres, of music. It fascinates me. Americana is one of those that, is a difficult one to pin down, I worked with one of the first acts I worked with was a Australian singer-songwriter called Caddy Cooper. And she described her music as being country blues folk. To me, is how you describe Americana, really. Would you disagree?
To be continued. You'll have to join us again in a couple of weeks to find out if Steve does disagree or not. How exciting. Huge thanks to Graham Steele for joining us this week. Part 2 is coming next episode. So, the house band, The Long Road, which features me, Steve Bonham and Kev Moore. This week we've got the first part of a piece from Kev Moore talking about his travels around the southern states of the US about 10 years ago and the resultant Blue Odyssey album and all the musical influences for that album, but also the musical influences in general he's picked up from his travels in the US. So, over to Kev.
Hi everyone. I thought I'd talk a little bit now about my influences regarding music from the States, particularly in the Americana country sort of vibe. It's not the route I took as I came into music professionally, so it's something I've discovered probably a little late and by degrees along the way. Certain songs I discovered started to appeal to me away from my normal genres. One particular one I remember was hearing a friend of mine play Graham Parsons' Cash on the Barrelhead, which I think came out on his Grievous Angel album. And I just really liked the vibe of that track. And I thought, yeah, this kind of stuff, it kind of rocks, There's not a lot of distortion going on. It's pretty clean guitar stuff, but really great picking and a great vibe, great rhythm. So that sort of started to grab me. And of course, the Eagles, anyway, introduced a country vibe to a lot of rock fans. So I was deeply into their stuff. And when I did my 2010 album Blue Odyssey, which really chronicled my trip across the southern states and down into the Delta, the first track on the album is basically about me arriving in Nashville. So naturally, it tended to be a country track. And the writing of that and the working out of the slide parts and the kind of country picking that I'm really not very good at, being a bass player, kind of opened my eyes to the skills and certainly my trip. And seeing some of the bluegrass musicians that are working in Nashville and what have you, the skill of these guys is just incredible. My old band Christie, obviously with the hit Yellow River, there is an incredible 100-mile-an-hour bluegrass version of that out, which was brought to our attention. So that was interesting too, quite eye-opening. And yeah, as I sort of did the trip, that's really was a big part of my education into the music of the southern states. As I moved through Memphis with more of the probably electric blues, a little bit more of the B.B. King vibe, sort of heavy blues, and then as I got into the Delta with the folklore really, and the Crossroads and the Robert Johnson thing, and I searched for the grave and the last resting place of Bessie Smith and what have you in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and this is really just steeping yourself in it. It's like sealing yourself in a mason jar and letting it just seep into you until you're done. And so a lot of that music then was taken into me. It quite simply was an education, especially doing an interview on King Biscuit Radio, in the King Biscuit Hour in Helena, which is on the banks of the Mississippi, which is actually broadcast out of the Delta Blues Museum there. So that was really the history surrounding me and listening to the musicians' stories and meeting Pinetop Perkins, who had met Robert Johnson. I mean, that's one step from the birth of the blues removed for me. That was quite incredible for me to see that. And the crossroads itself, in fact, probably a metaphor for the meeting of all those styles, the boogie-woogie, the rock and roll, the gospel, the hymnal sort of things coming out of the cotton fields, and the struggles of everybody, black and white in those days, that gave birth to this peculiar music, which branched out into all sorts of different styles, and is constantly undergoing change even to this day. People borrowing here and there, and the new genres coming out, of which I feel that we're one with the Anglo-Americana, from our perspective, searching out the legends and myths of the States and interpreting them in our way. And my album turned out to be exactly that, a complete melting pot of the different styles. New Orleans, in particular, gave me 3 songs for the album. Quite deliberately, I wanted to explore the different styles. So there was a New Orleans funk style track on there, which kind of paid homage to the Meters. And there was a song that was quite ethereal, which really explored the influence of Marie Laveau, the witch queen of New Orleans. So there was a lot of voodoo vibe going on in that. What style the song is, I don't really know, but it's a little bit scary. And then there was Old New Orleans, which is a song that pays homage to the Zydeco influence in that area of the world. And that's such a peculiar music. It really is everything and the kitchen sink, you know. It's got the guitars, it's got the violins, the fiddles, it's got the accordions, so the French thing coming in there, it's got the washboards and the old baked bean tins nailed to them, and the guy playing it with the thimbles, you know. And I tried to capture that when I did the album. And as I say, that song, Old New Orleans, was very... See if I can do a little bit of it for you now. Oh, the punch train down to New Orleans. You'll always find me in that town I hold so near. And that's Old New Orleans, and on that track, I've got a friend of mine from Atlanta. She played some of the fiddle parts on it, and I was doing all the accordion stuff with on the keyboards and what have you. And hopefully, I've managed to capture a little of the essence of that sort of vibe. Very happy music, I find, the Zydeco thing.
That was part 1. Looking forward to part 2 in a future episode where Kev will reveal more influences on his musical outlook. Thanks very much, Kev. So that's it for this episode of the Transatlantic Connection Show. Thank you for watching wherever in the world you are. Remember, please subscribe to the channel, like this video if you liked it, and share it with a pal who you think might like it too. The next episode will be out on Tuesday, the 29th of September 2020. If you enjoyed the show, you might enjoy our podcast too. It's called The Vagabond Way Podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. Just search for The Vagabond Way Podcast and you will find us. Also, don't forget, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/thevagabondway. Big thank you to our Patreons, and a special shout out to Orla Flynn, James Lydon, Yvette Lydon and Trish Taylor. Thank you for your continuing support. Patreon is a great platform that makes it super easy for anyone out there, you, to support content that you love on a monthly basis. It gives you direct access to the people creating the stuff you love, us, hopefully, and you get to play an integral part in shaping the direction of the things that we make. So, become a Vagabonder. That's our name for our supporters on Patreon to help us create music, live performances, books and short stories, this weekly YouTube show, our podcast, and some new things we're cooking up. As a Vagabonder, you can get the recordings and books we make for free, receive exclusive Patreon-only merchandise in the post, get regular behind-the-scenes updates from us, unlock access to exclusive live stream performances and Q&As, and lots more. You can help us create something different, something that entertains, and something that inspires others. So, join us on the journey and release the vagabond within. Patreon.com/thevagabondway. So until next time, keep making those transatlantic connections. Bye for now.